China's desire for global respect has been dented by Beijing's refusal to accept the judgment of the Permanent Court of Arbitration, which has rejected China's territorial claims in the South China Sea, leading Beijing to warn that the region could become a cradle of war.
For several years now, Beijing had been steadily increasing its dominance of the South China Sea to the annoyance of the US and other ASEAN nations, all of whom resent China's aggressive military muscle flexing and encroachments into their territorial waters. But it was the Philippines that decided to take the Chinese to an international tribunal at The Hague to contest China's encroachment of Scarborough Shoal, located close to the Philippines in the South China Sea, which is surrounded by Southeast Asian countries, all part of ASEAN. China claims much of the sea on the basis of its 9-dash line that would give Beijing virtual control over 90% of the sea and its key oil and natural resources, plus much of the shipping through the Straits of Malacca, a vital transit route for ships heading countries in East Asia like Japan and Taiwan. And even though Beijing, along with many other nations, had helped draft the UN Convention on the Laws of Sea in 1992, that requires country to respect the territorial waters of others and permit free movement of ships and maritime cargo. Chinese ships have of late been threatening those of other countries, including that from India, that undertake routine visits to this region. But now, in a stinging verdict, the International Tribunal has dismissed Beijing's claim, stating there was no legal basis for China to claim historic rights to resources within the sea areas falling within the 9-dash line. For now, this verdict has not only come as a blow to China's aspirations, but it has now challenged the ambitious personal project of the Chinese leader Xi Jinping, and the world will now be watching if China truly respects the global order or wants separate rules for itself.
Joining me to look at these several issues that concern the South China Sea dispute, Beijing's position, its geopolitical implications, we exclusively have with us Commodore Uday Bhaskar, a well-known strategic affairs expert, but a man with immense experience on maritime issues, having been earlier the director of the National Maritime Foundation and the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, and currently the director for the Society of Policy Studies. Commodore Bhaskar, sir, China's historical claims have been dismissed. Why is that so? And how binding is this judgment going to be on China?
The historical claim advanced by China in the maritime domain has been rejected, and very unambiguously, by the tribunal at The Hague, primarily because there is no locus, meaning that as far as the maritime domain is concerned, territoriality, which is linked with the land, has been extended by the Chinese government ostensibly on historical claims. So this very well-informed tribunal, which has some very eminent jurists, had seen this very carefully and rejected it primarily because after UNCLOS came into being in 1982, there has been a certain norm or an understanding about what constitutes the equivalent of territorial waters, and beyond that, how an exclusive economic zone could be defined based on certain principles.
I'll come in here, sir. UNCLOS, that is the United Nations Convention for the Laws of Seas, is something which everyone quotes. India has been quoting that, so has the United States. But China has repeatedly been dismissive about it, and more so, big powers in general are known to only quote and follow the rule book if it suits their strategic agenda. If it doesn't suit them, then they don't follow that. And China has been quoting the rule book, particularly in recent months, about India's NSG membership, India's claim to nail Hafiz Saeed and others in Pakistan for sponsoring terror at the UN. So what is it that the world can do to enforce a principle that they expect China as an emerging global power to respect?
You know, Maruf, what you raised is a very interesting aspect of China's strategic culture, meaning that when it suits Chinese interests, they invoke law and convention. And there is a very anomalous situation even as far as the UNCLOS is concerned, which is that the United States is not a signatory, but it conforms to the principles of the UNCLOS. China ratified the UNCLOS in June of 1996. And over the last 10 years, it has been invoking or using the principles of UNCLOS in its dispute with Japan in the East Sea. And interestingly, when it comes to the Philippines and the current situation as far as the South China Sea is concerned, it has rejected it. And as you know, the Vice Minister has used very intemperate language, called it waste paper, and so on and so forth. I think the challenge, and this is a geopolitical issue, how do we evolve norms wherein major powers also conform to what you might call as international law? And I think that is the challenge today for the global community when China has I would say, in such a disparaging manner, it has rejected international law primarily because there is no validity in the historical claim. So I think that is the starting point. You cannot apply territoriality in the maritime domain. If this is accepted, the next thing you know, it's absurd, but China can claim cyberspace. And
I mean, there are two issues that emerge from what you're saying. One is about historical claim, and the second is, the China's lack of positive responses whenever China feels that it should be getting the world to see the situation as China does. Now, I wanted to say that in the case of South China Sea, China has been doing a lot of muscle flexing. It's been building islands. It now wants to create an air defense zone. It also says that it will take action against those countries that challenge its maritime agenda there. So what can be the counter to the Chinese approach?
Well, on a matter of law, the particular decision from The Hague has made it very clear that in as much as China has invested in these man-made structures, the fact that you have the equivalent of an artificial island, that which is man-made, does not give you any maritime entitlement, such as the exclusive economic zone. So basically what Hague has said is that this is a no-go. You cannot create an artificial island and then claim a 200-kilometer exclusive economic zone. And this is a very important ruling. But the real challenge is, can it be enforced? And that is where I think you hit the road hits the rubber kind of thing, or the rubber hits the road, meaning who will take on China? Because already China has announced quite categorically that they will announce an air defense interception zone, the ADIZ, which they did in 2013. Now, I cannot see any of the regional countries actually challenging currently the Chinese muscular military assertiveness, if you will. They are using their private maritime militia, boats which are not part of the PLA Navy or the Coast Guard, but which are bumping, particularly Philippines and Vietnamese boats. So I think we have a regional challenge. It's going to be a very serious political cum security challenge for ASEAN. And the only country that could step in to make a difference is the United States. But at this point, it begs the question, does the US really want to get involved militarily with a regional situation where China is, as you said, flexing its muscles?
Equally, what China has gone across, apart from saying that, this entire tribunal was in a way bought off, and it's claiming that they were paid by either Philippines or Japan, China has been quoting the model of its engagement with India. The special representative talks, which started with Prime Minister Vajpayee's time. Currently, Mr. Doval has just had the 19th round of talks. As far as I know, that nothing has moved forward. China has boundaries with 14 countries. It seems to have resolved the boundaries with 12 of them, except 2 countries, which is India and Bhutan, as far as I know. So therefore, why is China firing from India's shoulder? And why is India relatively low-key in responding to even Chinese claims in a map in a Chinese daily, which says that India is one of the countries, although it is incorrectly depicted India's borders, it says it is India is one of the countries which is supporting the Chinese claim in the South China Sea.
Well, I think there are two things here. I think much of the current Chinese response, which has been extremely, I would say, disparaging of The Hague, to my mind is also aimed at the domestic audience, because President Xi Jinping has invested a considerable amount of his personal political capital in the maritime domain, the OBOR, and how he sees that as something that will transform China. It's part of the Xi legacy. the South China Sea ruling is going to be a big setback, and I think there is a certain amount of quote-unquote face saving that the Chinese government is currently engaged in, because I think they did not expect such an unambiguous rejection. And I do want to add, Maruf, that I was personally very, I would say, anguished and disappointed that China, which sees itself as an emerging quote-unquote responsible power, should have used the kind of language and cast aspersions on the integrity of what I might call as the most eminent judges that you could possibly find for such a complex maritime issue. And to suggest that they were paid money and to make this statement in public, I think is a lowering of the benchmark. I do hope that your program is seen by our Chinese interlocutors, and I really think that this is a very serious kind of omission for a major power to cast aspersions on a body which really, I would say, has been identified because of its competence and its integrity. So that's the first point. And I think secondly, as far as India has taken a very cautious approach. If you look at the text of the Indian statement, the preamble says India has noted the judgment or the verdict that the Hague has delivered. It has not welcomed it. And there is, I think, a very significant nuance in noting the verdict of the Hague or the decision, the award, as also welcoming it. And I think it's deliberate because India is trying to give China a certain space, to help it make a soft landing. Because today the international opinion and the international, I would say, perception of China is that it's just trying to bulldoze its way, and therefore it is being so disparaging about this particular Hague tribunal. And this sets a precedent, as you rightly said at the beginning, the geopolitical precedent, that if major powers think that they can get away with such, shall we say, behavior, then it just goes down the line. And I think that in the 21st century, when we are talking about globalization and the need for a certain degree of sanctity, arbitration is a very serious business. Today it's the maritime domain. Tomorrow it can be a major business, shall we say, issue, a commercial deal. If China decides to walk out because it doesn't suit its interests, you are actually damaging the whole lattice of globalization, which is based on this kind of trust in a major power, or for that matter, any power. I mean, take Singapore and China. They engage with each other because they have that confidence that neither side will walk away from deals that have been entered into. So